Survey is a new initiative which was organised by Jerwood Arts, and it's looking to support artists who are in the early stages of their career and are making really outstanding work across the UK. Rather than thinking about artists who have just graduated, we're really looking at that moment of artists who are building a career for themselves and thinking about where their practice might go in the future. As part of the process of selecting the artists who are in this show, we work with established artists to nominate some of the most interesting younger artists they felt were making brilliant work across the UK. We invited over 50 established artists and came up with a long list of artists which were then selected from by the head of visual arts at Jerwood Arts, Sarah Williams. Each of the artists have proposed a new work to make for this exhibition. So the works that you can see in the show are all new commissions that were made specifically to put into this show. One of the incredible things about Survey is the opportunity to work with partners at G39, Blue Coat and Baltic to continue to give life to these works for a period of 12 months and to work with the 15 artists across that period to continue to develop and reimagine this show for different audiences. So being able to bring all 15 of the artists to Liverpool, to Gateshead and to Cardiff, and to be able to spend some time in that city and meet other artists, meet galleries, work with the curators at Blue Coat, Baltic and G39 is just a fantastic opportunity for the artists and the organisations to make new networks, to think about new connections and to create new opportunities that will go on way beyond the Survey exhibition.
The work that I presented as part of Survey is called Good to Us. The starting point for the work is a piece of text that was then presented as performance by Amiri Baraka, who was a civil rights activist, African-American guy in the 70s. And in this work, Dope, he assumes the role of a hysterical African-American church pastor and talks in quite an erratic, performative manner about some of the black American problems at that point in the 70s. And so with the work for Survey, I've been developing a kind of call and response that kind of reflects my own interests in American and British conversations, transatlantic conversations centered around race and identity. The work features some music production that I've been making, which is sample-based, and a montage of images and material that I've been collecting myself or that has been suggested via social media algorithms, and I'm interested in kind of taking all of that and presenting it in a way that maybe thinks about how images and information are distributed and the speed and the volume at which we are forced to engage with sometimes.
So this piece is called Arpeggios, and it's a series of wall drawings that are made on site in each location, and it's bodies surveying each other, like playing off Survey, the name of this show, and they're all sort of looking into each other's bits and pieces to try and survey each other's bodies and maybe gain some information. And then there's a piece called Song Drapes, which is a series of bodies basically attaching or pulling or supporting, and those bodies are, I guess, thinking about support systems, so which is a broader theme in my painting. How bodies support each other, or how they're maybe not supporting each other, and how they could do it differently or better. I suppose the idea of having one piece really to represent you as your practice as an artist, it's quite an amazing pressure, a good pressure to think, right, come on, I've got to really give it to them. So there were moments making the painting that I was really thinking, what else could happen? Is this really as far as it can go? In any way am I apologising for anything? And I want them to be not aware maybe of what the boundaries are. So the figures are really pushing that, what's appropriate and what isn't.
So this is Happy Happy Leaf, and it is slowly rotating and dripping a fluorescent green liquid into a lovely silver pot. And this is the initial element of a larger installation that I envisage making down the line. And so the deity is what I believe to be the focused element of this imagined ceremony that's going to have music and dance and indulgence, and that narrative is informed by ancestral stories about greed, money and family divides. It's been pretty incredible to see the work and how this show has developed over the course of a year. So it's quite interesting to see how these ideas have formed and grown over time, and how I want to take things forward.
So this work is in response to some research that I was doing around Foley sound production, which is all the dubbed sound effects which are put in post-production in adverts, film, TV, and it's all the sort of human noises that you don't really notice when you're watching TV or films. So this is a recreation of a section of a Foley stage, and I've accompanied it with a sort of DIY Foley soundtrack which I made at home in quite a rudimentary way with my own props. There's a sort of comedy that comes about in realising what something is imitating, so quite often it's very far removed from what's on screen. So a really classic example is coconut shells for horses' hooves, or a watermelon being smashed. And I like this sort of disconnection from the original and the comedy that can kind of come out of that. This is the first time that I've used sound, so it was a real challenge for me, and felt like a real risk. But I feel like now is maybe something that I will be able to push further in the future.
So it's a pond, and it contains stories. So there's like 6 main stories, which are all about success stories or failed success stories. So they all have a character who suggests different ways to transform your environment or your experience or yourself. They're all quite tragic, and I think the sculpture is quite tragic itself. The plants are all dying, so it's kind of becoming more tragic as it goes on.
This is the Movie Makers. It's a kind of experimental documentary film, and it's something I've made together with a community of amateur filmmakers based in East Lancashire in a small town called Colne. The Pendle Movie Makers, they've been there as a group in various forms since the 60s, and together with the various members I shot this piece. I think my relationship with the group really grew and developed in the 2 years, and I guess thanks to the survey exhibition, it really pushed me into making a final piece. The major element of my work is based on documentary practice, and it's something I'm trying to develop into different directions within the context of contemporary art. A lot of my projects are based on kind of relationship building. It really enables me to hang out with people, get to know people who are very different to myself, and it is this way of crossing into different communities, and I think this is something that's been building in my practice.
It's a fabric applique that's divided into 4 sections that are kind of domestic patterns of different architectural space in the home, and then they correspond with 4 16mm films that are seen as 4 different channels. So I was interested in the body in relationship to domestic space and how that kind of appears or disappears in that space. And I was thinking about processes of the body that could mirror processes in the home. And the work is performed each day by people that work in the institution that it's housed. So I was kind of interested in how the institution could perform the work, and also kind of reveal those like moments of, I guess, invisible labour from the home into an institutional space. I was interested in how the applique could become similar to moving image, a kind of layering medium that offers like that opportunity to collage or become like a montage of different processes.
So the title of the work is 2/11/2020, and it's a fictional Metro newspaper from the 2nd of November 2020, which would be the day before the next presidential elections in the United States. And the main news story reported on is the assassination of Donald Trump. So the main part of my practice consists of writing, And this is an image that came out of a series of fictions that I'm working on for a book at the moment. And then the writing sort of turns into sculptural objects. The sculptural objects turn into video and performance. And they're referenced in sort of choreographed pieces of performance. So in a way, it's just one component of a larger work in a way. The idea for this particular sculpture came from commuting on the bus and the tube in London, and noticing that most mornings people have their heads sort of buried in these newspapers, which claim to be sort of unbiased but are ideologically driven. And so I think at the time that I was making my last performance, I was thinking about these sort of invisible ideologies embedded in things like advertising, because that's essentially what a free newspaper is, I guess. And of course this is a sort of a material and a form of distribution of information which has very heavily affected global politics and British politics in the last 2 years. So I wanted to look very closely at that form as a sculptural component in a sort of a larger work of writing in a way.
So the work is called Nobody Feels Right, So Why Am I Any Different? And it's a acrylic on board painting comprised of 5 separate elements. The central component describes a frenetic domestic scene with a number of characters that are engaged in different bodily and architectural interventions, and they're surrounded by this kind of visible plumbing system which ends with this downsized septic tank which wears a shiwi, like a stand-to-pee device, as a hat. So for me, a large part of my identity as a queer trans person is a lot of kind of feelings connected with shame, and knowing when, or learning when to kind of conceal certain aspects of who I am. So within this work, I wanted to use objects and systems as a vehicle for kind of talking about that experience, thinking about how we might read or experience gender within our surroundings, and finding kind of playful, humorous ways of talking about this. I guess I want to kind of find visual, and particularly with this work, more kind of spatial ways of talking about what my experience feels like, and to create a space that has more kind of mutability with humour and levity.
So the title of the work is called I'll Always Love You, But I Don't Have to Like You, which is sort of a soundbite from my dad that his mum used to say to him, and it's a thing of when I'm being awful, that it's like, I love you, but I don't like you very much. It was really interesting to me because it's those sorts of things that families say to each other that cut so deeply and are so harsh, but they're also filled with a lot of love and a lot of affection as well, and they're also quite funny and humorous. I made the work with my family, and that was my mum, my dad and my sister, and the work's about all the things that are in the peripherals of your family home. You never acknowledge them, you don't know the stories behind them or who bought them or why they're there. And in my family home there's things like old things from when my father used to teach in Africa, and then like some really incredible designer plates that my mum had bought in the 80s, and then an awful crap like a sort of solar panel woman that just wiggles like this, which my dad actually remade. So there's this mixture between a hierarchy of objects, which I was really interested in, and my idea was that we were going to sit down all together and remake them. What was so good about Jerwood was that it enabled me to learn a process that I'd never actually done before. So this was raku firing, and raku firing is so tempestuous. It's like a process where you put the ceramics in and you bring them up to temperature so fast. So usually ceramics would take about 12 hours to get to temperature, but this is like immediate. And they go through this really intense process, and then it lifts it up, and then at 1,000 degrees you sort of take them out with tongs, and they're still sort of on fire, and they're on fire, and it creates this incredible marbling sort of process, and you have no idea how they'll come out. So for me it was really important that me and my family all did that together, so we all took them out of the kiln together. And it was this sort of thing of trying to ingrain them into my world, but also, and through the process of making, actually have them understand what it is that I do, rather than me telling them, I'm doing okay.
The two works that I have on show are Decoy and The Track with No Name. I suppose they sort of metaphorically speak of diversion, obstruction, the idea of subjectivity, and how signs and symbols and signification work within our everyday lives, and how readings can be complicated, and how we sort of deal psychologically with the residue of these things, you know. I suppose they talk about a sort of glamour, a sort of sense of shining surfaces that absorb the viewer. So the viewer is brought into the works. The other works are present within the work. This allows the work to have a dialogue with not just the architecture, but the other works within the work and the viewer themselves.
The starting point for the work was that thought: does a Hollywood film in which climate change is averted actually exist? And what might the world look like, and what might our response to climate change be if there were to be this kind of mass media product that sort of set out a template for how climate change could be averted, and made it interesting and exciting, and maybe forefronted the idea of the collective over the hero, and how might the format of a film have to change to suit that subject matter. So the work is a large banner. It's maybe a bit like a trade union banner, or something you'd see on a parade or a procession. It features a large cinema with the text imposed on top of it. Weirdly, I based it on an image of a 1920s cinema that I found on Google, and then the next week saw that cinema in York. So it's actually the old Odeon in York. Survey is the first national touring exhibition I've been in. It's a series of 4 shows that are the highest profile 4 shows I've probably been in thus far. It's been an amazing opportunity to see more of the country, to link up with other artists and curators and people in those places. And it's just been phenomenally exciting to be around 14 other artists, none of whom I really knew before, and to make those new connections, and hopefully those will get stronger going forwards.